Is that working?
Oh,
yeah, that's
can
working.
some? Oh, good. Hi, everyone. This is going to be a very robust and more intimate conversation. So if folks would like to move to the front so you can join this conversation, that would be very welcome. Thank you. Great. Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning, I mean. I think we can actually begin. We have a good critical mass here. So welcome to this panel on the global movement of people versus fossil fuels. My name is Jean Su, and I am the Energy Justice Director at a US-based organization called the Center for Biological Diversity, and part of an incredible coalition of over 1,200 organizations in the United States called People versus Fossil Fuels, which is demanding that the Biden administration declare a climate emergency and phase out all fossil fuels. What we have today is an incredible and robust panel of fighters and policy experts on the global fight against the fossil fuel industry, our richest and most corrupt industry that is stopping us all from meaningful climate action. Before I begin, I'm going to ask each speaker to briefly introduce themselves, and then we're going to go into a deep and robust conversation. I think all of us are a little bit tired of talking heads, so this is going to be much more conversation, and we definitely want the audience to chime in towards the end as well. So with that, I'll kick it off to Susie first.
Hello, everybody. That works, right? Hello, everybody. My name is Susanne. Yeah, that works? Okay. Hello, everybody. My name is Susanne Scherbert. I'm from Friends of the Earth, Germany, and that's part of the Friends of the Earth is the biggest international grassroots network. And I'm an activist, climate justice activist since more than 20 years already, so I'm really happy to be part of that panel today.
Hi everyone, my name is Dean Pepe. I am from PowerShift Africa, and I'm also one of the co-facilitators for the Don't Gas Africa campaign. I've had several years implementing strategies around fossil fuel production across Africa, and also particularly targeting public finance institutions. Thank you.
Hello everybody, my name is Hakimo Tosatao from Botswana. I am indigenous San person. Okay, thank you. I'm an indigenous San person. Here, clear. I said Hakimo Tosatao is my name from Botswana. I'm an indigenous San person. I work with indigenous peoples, opportunities for self-determination and indigenous people's rights issues, on issues advocacy, and I'm also a regional chair of Indigenous Peoples of Africa Coordinating Committee. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone, and in Texas vernacular, howdy. My name is John Beard, and I am the founder and CEO of the Port Arthur Community Action Network, an environmental, social justice, and community development organization. Glad to be with you all here in COP. No better place I'd rather be than with other activists and those others who are working to fight against fossil fuels and save the planet, as well as save humanity.
Hey y'all, I'm Rashetta Ozan from Southwest Louisiana. I am the Clean Energy Organizing Director for Southwest Louisiana and Southeast Texas, and I'm also the founder, director, and CEO of the Vessel Project of Louisiana. I am so, I guess, rejoiced and refreshed to be on this panel talking to my colleagues who are fighting the same fight and not feeling like I'm up here having to influence anyone any type of way, but just to have a conversation. So thank you all for being here.
Great, thank you, Rashida. So let me do some ground setting as we have this audience here. If people weren't aware, the Paris Agreement has no mention of fossil fuels whatsoever in the agreement. Please don't think that is some mistake or oversight. That is absolutely purposeful. The people who are funding COPs, the people who have over 600 delegates here, is the fossil fuel industry, and they purposefully lobbied politicians to extract that term and to obfuscate targeting them since 2015 in the Paris Agreement. For the first time last year, this UN process recognized fossil fuels in its phase out, in its final text decision, by saying that countries would agree to the phase down of unabated coal. As we know, that's not good enough. That's also, it has tons of inequities as part of that. And so this year, right now, we are on the precipice of another fight to advance that commitment. India has come out to say that they support decision text that would say that all countries commit to phasing down all fossil fuels, not just coal. And the EU and UK have also dropped that they're now interested in the phase out of all fossil fuels, which is even better. So we have some momentum, but it is because of all of us here for civil society, we need to press very hard on absolute text to get the phase out of fossil fuels as much as possible in there. But all of that is divorced from the actual lives and the impacts of fossil fuels, and that's what this panel is here to do, and to bring fossil fuels directly into this space, not as a funding mechanism for stopping climate change action, but actually as a motivation and a force of propelling to stop the root cause of the climate emergency, which is fossil fuels. So I wanted to actually open this up and bring this back home to the stories of what communities are facing on the ground in terms of fossil fuel extraction. So Rashida and Satu, I was hoping you could tell us about what are the impacts that you're seeing of the fossil fuel industry, whether it is the ridiculous climate pollution, the climate disasters, and the human rights violations happening on the ground. Rashida, would you like to begin?
Yes, of course, Jean. So in Southwest Louisiana, I live near a city called Lake Charles. I don't know if you all have heard of Lake Charles, Louisiana. I know everybody's familiar with New Orleans, but New Orleans is not the state. The state is Louisiana. And so I live in Southwest Louisiana, which is actually closer to my brother John in Port Arthur. Well, in between Southwest Louisiana and Port Arthur, we've had several hurricanes in the past few years. But just in Southwest Louisiana, we had two major hurricanes, Hurricane Laura and Hurricane Delta, both in 2020, followed by Winter Storm Uri in the winter of 2021, January, and then followed by a flood in which the mayor of Lake Charles has called a 100-year biblical flood, and then other events like tornadoes and like just massive rain events. And so the citizens there were like, what's going on? Like, why are there so many well, they were calling them natural disasters. Why are these things continuously happening? And I'm like, look around. We're surrounded by industry. This industry has built on our wetlands, which are our natural storm protections. Whenever a hurricane comes up out of the water, those wetlands, which is what it says, is water with land mixed in it, those hurricanes get caught up in the wetlands and it breaks them up. Well, when industry builds on those wetlands, we no longer have that storm surge protection. And also we're facing coastal erosion. These things are not political. They're not made up. These are things that are evidence-based, and we have seen the amount of coast we've lost. But due to all of these climate disasters and industrial impacted disasters, We have more than 500 citizens still living in FEMA trailers. And if you don't know what a FEMA trailer is or a FEMA camp, it's what the government gives you as shelter after a disaster. But these are not big enough or sustainable for families. I'm a mom of 6, and we lived in a FEMA trailer for 2 years. I just got out of the FEMA trailer in June. So my story is just a portion of what other families are facing. These last 500 people who are still in these trailers are like at the bottom, y'all. These are people who have absolutely no resources, no families, no money. They have no option but to stay in these FEMA trailers until we, small grassroots nonprofit organizations, can help them to get out, because government has put the burden on us.
Thanks, Rashida. And could you speak about who in the United States is most impacted? Which communities?
Yes, so obviously I'm a black woman. What my community looks like. It's mostly low income, black, indigenous people of color, mostly moms, single moms with children, and elderly. That's who are still in the FEMA trailers. Like our people that are most at risk, who are already at risk, low income, very poor, now have been impacted by, well, really by systemic things that have caused them to be in those communities. As John spoke yesterday, they can't help where they live. So they cannot help that a hurricane came and destroyed their homes and they didn't have anywhere else to go. They also could not help the fact that they were already not making enough money before these disasters and therefore didn't have a lot saved. And so now they've had to start from scratch. And it's, like I said, people who look like this panel who are always the most impacted. Historically, people who look like the folks up here, and thank you so much for ensuring that this panel looks like the folks who are impacted the most. Historically, we have always been at the front lines of this systemic racism that intersects all of these issues: social injustice, climate injustice, environmental injustice, racial injustice, health injustices, and so many things that when something like a hurricane hits our communities, we already have so much going on that there's no way that we can recover quickly. And we don't want to be resilient. We want help. We want equity. We want solutions.
Woo! Powerful, powerful, Rashida. Satu, I'm wondering if you can give us the perspective on what's happening on the impacts of climate change in your community on the other side of the world.
Thank you very much. And basically, from where I come from, southern part of Africa, mainly in Botswana, climate change narratives and associated impacts are the same. Botswana, to be precise, is said to be subtropical and arid climate. And in the recent years, we have seen heat waves attacking. We have seen cyclones. And in the past two couples of weeks, Botswana have received a great amount of water or rainwater, which we have never experienced in a very long time. It is the beginning of the rainy season, and most of the southern part of Botswana, some roads were closed. The newly constructed roads, some had some sort of sliding down, and prolonged droughts. And sitting here as an indigenous person from the region, given the fact that the indigenous peoples in the region continue to live under or below poverty datum line, they are the most affected in such cases. And once the country struggles to maintain its mainstream economic lines, you would wonder how the indigenous peoples at the grassroots level would maintain. We've seen alcohol abuse, We've seen people who go starving. We've seen people, young people who go to the cities and sell their bodies. So this is the case. And as indigenous peoples here and home, we are sitting at a firing line. The firing line between anti-fossil narratives and capitalist fossil infrastructural advancement. We are there to say no because of the narratives that say let there be climate mitigation solution. And again, capitalist world are coming and trying to tap into the fossil reserves. As indigenous peoples, we are in between the two worlds. And we are there risking everything without meaningful resources in terms of money, in terms of research, in terms of capacity to engage with the two fronts. Thank you.
So Satu, I think you're bringing up really the elephant in this conference, which is the fossil fuel capitalist industry that we're all a part of and how that is affecting everybody on a very personal basis. John, you're actually at ground zero of a very capitalist site in the United States where you've seen this play out over the course of your lifetime and have fought against it. So I was wondering if you could talk about that portion, as well as the bullshit arguments about how fossil fuel industry brings jobs, and how, I mean, that really is an obstacle in all of this. What is the real story on the ground, and how do we deal with those narratives?
Thank you, Jean. I like to say that Port Arthur stands or sits at the nexus of climate change. And why I say that is because of this. You have the combined elements of weather, climate, and also the petrochemical industry. Matter of fact, the industry began a little over 100 years ago, just 15 miles from where I live in Beaumont, Texas, when Spindletop's Gusher came in. 3 years later, the first refineries were built, 2 in Port Arthur, 1 in Beaumont, one of which is the largest refinery in the country, which is Motiva, as well as Valero and Total, and then ExxonMobil was built. What we see on the ground there, when we talk about the nexus, is the weather elements also. As Rochetta alluded to earlier, in the past 17 years, we've had 5 major hurricanes starting in 2005, and at least 5 smaller ones that grazed or passed close to the area. And all of them did substantial damage to the city. But you also had, in 2017, Hurricane Harvey, which dumped the largest rainfall in America in the Port Arthur area, over 60.5 inches of rain in a given period. Then you also have, this following year in 21, Winter Storm Uri, which virtually froze the entire state of Texas. So we see the extremes of climate change right there. And what makes them even more manifest when we talk about global warming and sea level rise is the fact that Port Arthur is on the Gulf Coast itself. And there are vantage points I can take you to in the city where you can look south and see into the Gulf of Mexico and see the ships. And then you can turn to the north and see the glistening, gleaming, and smoking refineries that make up the city. And then you can also look and see how perfectly flat it is, as flat as this table we're sitting at, from ground to sky. All of those elements together combine to make us the focal point of all that's happening. But not only that, but everything we're talking about here, from carbon sequestration to hydrogen hubs, to petrochem build-out, to LNG, to pipelines for crude oil export, as well as LNG gas, happen in Port Arthur. It's all there, and it's in a very small and confined area. So when you combine all of those elements, we are at the nexus. We see how it happens. And then going back to what Jean said, there was a time when these refineries started that prosperity was there for everyone. My father worked in a refinery for Gulf Oil. I am a retired 38-year employee of ExxonMobil Corporation. And a number of people during the times that I've been on this earth had those opportunities. But we've seen things shift now to where people of color, BIPOC people included, indigenous people, do not get those jobs and those opportunities. And because of that, you have a situation in Port Arthur where 2/3 of the citizens, a city of 57,000, are economically disadvantaged. That's a family of 4 making less than $35,000 a year. You also have a high poverty rate of between 27 and 30%. That's a family of 4 making less than $20,000 a year. So when you combine all of those elements, and then you hear these arguments or these sayings that they all bring to you about jobs and prosperity and how they're going to make the communities better and they enrich the communities where they are, nothing can be further from the truth. Because what you also have to take into account is the pollution. Some of the worst polluters in America are in Port Arthur. Valero Refinery had over 600 air quality violations in a 5-year period. And then you have the serial polluter, a Koch brothers company. And for those of you not familiar with the Koch brothers or Koch Industries, look it up. The Koch brothers company, Oxbow calcining, emits over 11,000 tons of particulate matter into the air that we have to breathe a year. That's not counting the other refineries included. They take up 80% of the air shed just in those factors alone with sulfur compounds. So when you add all of this together, it places an extreme burden on communities of color, and they don't have a way out. So it's important as we have these discussions and talk about this here, that we understand that the age of fossil fuels has to come to an end because it's oppressive, and it's not only hurting those communities of color that are along the Texas Gulf Coast and in Africa, in Appalachia, and all over the world, but now it's become a world problem. The very fate of humanity lies in the balance. The fate of this planet, the only home we have, is in the balance. So it's important we understand these things and understand how they fit and understand the nexus that's created when you combine all these elements together like you do in Port Arthur and how it impacts people adversely. And as Rochetta said earlier, there has to be some fairness and some equity. A better world is possible, and we have to fight and strive to find a way to make that world and bring it into being.
I also see we have incredible people in the audience as well, and so when we open for question and answer, would love to hear from our Indigenous sisters about the devastating impacts of the fossil fuel industry, especially towards missing women and Indigenous peoples. I did want to shift us a bit on the geopolitics of fossil fuels going on right now. We're blessed to have a panel that represents 3 of the key nodes of a triangle that is on the precipice of a new renaissance of oil and gas drilling. Right now, we have a situation where the Ukraine-Russia war, the Russian war on Ukraine, really brought to the fore how fossil fuels has fueled war, how oligarchs and rich oil and gas industry executives have been able to fund Putin's war on Ukraine. And that interconnection between violence and fossil fuels is so prominent there. The reaction that we would have thought made sense, given that it was war, is to say no to war, no more fossil fuels, no more violence funded by fossil fuels, no more price volatility that people are feeling around the world in terms of raised oil and gas prices. But what we're seeing at this COP is so disturbing in response. We are seeing Germany broker deals with Egypt to increase gas towards Germany, to keep them on the gas addiction line. We see African leaders dash for gas across the African continent, regardless of the incredible fights that you have been put up to say no more gas, we want renewables, we do not want gas anymore. And then for Rochetta and John in the United States, we have a president who has said he's a climate leader because he's passed a bill with some renewable energy investment. But a report from Oil Change International showed today that President Biden is #1 in the world in terms of approving new fossil fuel expansion projects. So this is all, excuse my French, a really fucked up situation. And I wanted to get Dean's perspective on the dash for gas in Africa to talk about what you are seeing. How are these geopolitics factoring in for you?
Hi, everyone. And yeah, thank you for using that French language because it is a fucked up situation. And fundamentally, I mean, it's ridiculous, right? There's no way we can reimagine a renewable energy future if public finance institutions have got leaders that are climate deniers, first of all. And what's also really great about what's come out of this conversation as well is the stories from the communities, because the climate story or the climate emergency has not really tried to address how vulnerable communities are the most affected. And particularly, you know, there's a growing inequality and poverty rate in Africa. And the most important thing to note is some of us do not have deep enough pockets to not feel the pinch of the climate emergency, which has left over 600 million people across the continent without energy access. And now we have reached a point, a very important turning point, fundamentally here at the COP27, because Africa sits at a crossroad and there is a fight to decide its energy development future playing out here at COP. This battle really started fundamentally a long time ago. Particularly, the first red flag was at COP26. And immediately, months later, we had the Kigali Forum, where a group of ministers agreed that gas is the future for Africa. That followed the change in EU taxonomy. That then triggered the African Union access paper really on energy access and just transition, fundamentally, that wanted to ground nuclear and gas energy as the energy future for Africa. That then also triggered Africa Energy Week. And in all of this, it is quite evidenced how many institutions in Africa that are meant to be facilitating a renewable energy future have been captured by fossil fuel lobbyists. Because then one thing that we can use to evidence that is, in all these discussions, we've had petroleum, mining, and energy ministers. In all of these records, there hasn't been a point in history yet in the past 12 months where we've had environment or even climate change ministers actually attending these conversations, who actually have a voice, who are actually climate justice conscious, for the lack of a better statement to say, right? And this just really goes on to speak about how much that agency as well, that's meant to be governing and championing renewable energy, has been fundamentally captured. And right here at COP, that narrative is actually being equipped to try and put us in a position where we do not own our own narrative, where we are labeled as anti-development, where they've used colonialism as a weapon to say, that is how we're going to achieve an energy future. And they have used that narrative and they have equipped themselves. And now we're at a point in time where we have to understand that the fossil fuel lobby isn't just trying to capture institutions, they're trying to capture narratives. They have attempted to twist the energy access crisis in Africa and faces and claim that anyone fighting fossil fuels is trying to deny Africa's right to develop and is perpetuating a colonial attitude by holding Africa back. Now, we all know in this room that that is not true. And this is definitely something that I would like to call a cheap trick, fundamentally because when the truth is quite the opposite, the energy access and climate catastrophe we now know has faced with the very same fossil fuel industry that's really trying to trap us once again, as if history has not provided us enough reasons that the extractivism here has not produced any improved socio-economic livelihood is baffling. And fundamentally because of that, we want to understand that this campaign is not fundamentally about us being anti-development, but anti-exploitation and segregation. We need to own, right here at COP27, our own energy narrative and strengthen our positions, particularly that our advocacy is not about whether Africa has the right to develop. Of course it does. This is rather a discussion and a position about what is the best way for Africa to develop, and one that is not governed by fossil fuels. One position that we have within this campaign is that it is not about whether or not the global north owes a climate debt. We can all agree that they surely do. But the unfulfilled promises of rich countries are not a good enough reason for Africa to pursue self-harming development that is grounded on fossil fuel production. The Don't Gas Africa campaign is not about whether the global north is hypocritical in telling Africa whether or not to exploit their fossil fuels. We can all agree that they are being hypocrites, right? But the hypocrisy is no reason to repeat their mistakes. There are options available to Africans that didn't exist 100 years ago. And we cannot afford to choose today an already outdated system that will only really bridge us to catastrophe. Fundamentally, the dash of gas is like trying to build telephone lines right now in an age of mobile phones, which is ridiculous. And today, Africa says no. The global south says no. The communities that are suffering in the state of Louisiana say no. We want to own our own narrative and be a key stakeholder instead of victims and headlines. And we have to stand here and say, are we not tired? Which is great because this is a robust discussion, because I want to get to a point where we're all tired of saying, oh, we're here because of a failed energy system, we're here because 600 million people don't have energy access. We now know all of that. We now need to change the discussion to about how we've been unfairly treated, and this has got no human rights at the core. And the time is now. We are seated here right now, yet decisions are made on our behalf. And where do we fall off? So dear friends, dear comrades, let us take this vehicle, let us own it. We are the masters of our own destiny, not the fossil fuel lobbyists. Thank you.
Susie, I think it's interesting that the narrative that the fossil fuel industry is pushing is energy access for Africa, which still has 5 billion people around the world, not just in Africa, but without electricity. In the United States, 1 million families every year are cut off without electricity because it's unaffordable. And now in Germany, you're missing heat, you're missing gas. So how do you counter that narrative in Germany, and what do you make of this geopolitical situation?
Thanks a lot. Maybe let me just start with that we should have had a Polish colleague here as well, but I don't know if you heard already about the news, but there was a Russian-made, I think it's not clear what happened exactly, but the Russian-made missile landed in Poland and killed 2 people. So because of that, we can't have, I think it's part of the bigger story we are talking here about. And unfortunately, our colleague, our comrade can't be with us here today. When I hear the stories that we heard already from my friends on the left side, I think my first thought, before I answer your question, I think my first thought is, this is exactly what we have to bring to historically responsible countries like Germany, Europe, the US, much more to the people in there, to the government, but also really to the people. Because we see, like, I'm coming from Germany, I don't live there, I live in the heart of the EU in Brussels, where the EU decisions are taking place. And we don't hear enough, actually, what's happening, what are the impacts, what are kind of the impacts that people and livelihoods feel, and what are impacts in the global south. So I just wanted to start with that. That's something important that and I take that as a responsibility as well, to take not only the stories, but also what you said very clearly, kind of the narratives, and the narratives that comes from you and needs to come from you, that I take that and we take that forward. Maybe just to go into your question, just to place where we are here, you talked already about the Russian invasion and the kind of global situation we are in. Germany, kind of, if you look at the import of Germany's fossil fuels, kind of 65% of the imported gas is coming from Russia. 46 imported coal is coming from Russia. And 30 imported oil and derivatives are coming from Russia. So there, kind of, you see why Germany is in an energy crisis now. And as you say, it's a massive topic, and kind of feeling a glimpse of an energy crisis, what our colleagues and comrades are talking here about. But the answer, what you see, I mean, it would have been a great opportunity to think about, okay, how can we use it as an energy transformation? How can we use it as a just energy transformation to get actually rid of fossil fuels and look exactly what I said into the impacts that's happening there and working against it and for the people? Instead, what we see You started talking already about a few things, but we see new gas deals happening. Our Chancellor Scholz is traveling all over the world. He's traveling to Senegal, he's traveling to Canada, he's traveling to the US to kind of find new sources of gas. So what we hear is kind of the opposite to the opportunity that's actually there. And even more, I think, to add, then Germany and other European countries are kind of going into those just transition energy partnerships, in different countries. So to claim we want to help you to develop a so-called sustainable pathway, but on the other side, exploring more gas in exactly those countries as well. So there's a kind of hypocrisy that is, that's really disturbing and really devastating. So I think, yes, of course, we have to take care of the people who are in energy crisis, specifically also the energy poor in Germany, in European countries, but not neglecting again the impacts that we are facing, and that will be bigger and bigger in the global south, as some of the examples we hear here clearly. So yeah, I'm taking that role here and calling out specifically Germany, the European Union, and the global north. Maybe I stop here first. Yep.
How do you counter or respond to the claim right now from the US and Germany that we need to save Europe and we need to drill more now in order to provide energy security to Europe? And we also need to drill more so that we can place ridiculous transmission lines across the continent of Africa as well, instead of leapfrogging to renewable energy. What is your response? Because that is the biggest pushback that we've gotten for continuing to drill for oil and gas. Anybody, please.
When you talk about this, I think about the irony of it all. The irony of the fact that while we're sitting here at this very COP and talking about decarbonizing, the President of the United States and others are talking about drill more and get more, or recarbonizing. That's what you're doing, essentially. You're putting more carbon in the atmosphere. That goes totally against what we say we are trying to do. It's going to also extend for indigenous people further exploitation. But yet we talk about equity and fairness and justice. So the irony, the cruel irony of it all is that it doesn't add up. It doesn't add up when we talk about in America having energy independence, but yet you have the captains of industry saying, drill, baby, drill, and we need to sell every molecule and ship it overseas. Where's the independence there? The high prices of a world commodity market like petrochemicals and oil and gas are in fact the very reason why they're high, because now the cheap American gas is being used to help, so they say, Europe. But instead of using the gas and using more fossil fuels, why aren't we accelerating the transition to clean, green, renewable energy? That could solve the problem. We're looking at a stopgap and saying gas is the key, but methane is worse than carbon, and hydrogen is worse than methane for the environment. So what are we doing here? This mixed messaging coming from America and being sold by the petrochemical companies isn't for the fact of saving Europe or helping Africa even. It's for enriching the pockets of the oil oligarchs and also the stock and shareholders of those companies. All you got to do is look at their bottom line profit for the last quarter, up in the triple digits and sometimes in the 4-digit range in one quarter. They make billions while billions are being hurt, while billions are suffering. There's no fairness and equity in that. So what's the solution? How do we end this? We have to unify our voices and call for the very changes we seek. Suzanne in Germany has to be a strong advocate for not building those LNG receiving facilities so that we don't have a market any longer to ship that gas to, because without that market, then you have no need to drill and ship it overseas. Then the fight Roy Shedder and I have is to stop the build-out of petrochemical oil and gas infrastructure that is going to fuel that. Without buyers, there is no market. With a shift and a transition to clean, green renewables, we can save Europe, we can save and help Africa, and we can also save the Gulf South. But it's going to require all of us working together and speaking to that message and pushing back, as you said earlier, against that narrative that says this is what we have to do. How can the very people who caused the problem now be in charge of bringing about the solution? Have they ever done it before? No, they don't have a history of doing it. All they've done is exploit and create opportunities for themselves to make more money. But everything ain't about money, y'all. It's about saving lives, and it's about saving the planet. As you heard me say earlier, Port Arthur's got twice the state and national average for cancer, but not just cancer, heart, lung, and kidney disease. What about that? What about the effects on people? What about my dear friend Casey and her community, the indigenous people that when they set up these man camps to exploit, that women come up missing or raped and murdered? What about that? What about the exploitation of Africa? This exploitive industry has to come to an end, and we have to call for an end to it now and accelerate the use of clean, green, renewable energies. But it's only going to happen if we do it. They may have billions of dollars, these multi-billion-dollar multinational corporations, but they're billions of our voices, and they're billions of us. And if we stand together, we can push back against that. We can help Germany and Africa and Europe. But we have to provide the way of doing it and show our leadership and others that this is the true alternative. No false solutions. This is what's the real alternative for the entire world. And we're not going to take it anymore. We refuse to be sacrificed any further on the altar of petrochemicals and big oil. We have to fight back and push back against that narrative.
Thank you so much for that, John. And to add to that, as we're talking about the intersection of the issues that the fossil fuel industries have continuously for decades burdened our communities with, John touched on the health issues, but for decades, these same communities that are bearing the burdens of these fossil fuel industries have also been the same communities who have seen the biggest health impacts from those industries, but also those are communities who already have high health risk. If we didn't learn anything from COVID, we saw that the biggest population of people who were impacted and infected with COVID were Black, indigenous people of color. And we're always the ones that are most impacted. We always have the most health issues. And so they continue to put these type of industries in our communities because long ago, we were made sacrifices. We are sacrifice zones for everything that they want to test, everything new, everything innovative that they don't want in their communities because they don't know how they will harm them. They put them in our communities, and we bear that burden. We bear those health issues. We bear our communities being blown away in these hurricanes and in these other disasters because we are that sacrifice zone to them. And so we have to show that we can no longer be a sacrifice zone. We can no longer sit by and allow these industries to come into our community or our fellow brothers and sisters communities. John and I live in two different states, but as you see, we work together because just like Hurricane Harvey affected him, it impacted Southwest Louisiana. Whenever Hurricanes Laura and Delta hit Southwest Louisiana and Lake Charles, where did we have to go? To Port Arthur, which was not ready to accept us, but it was right across the border and the closest place we could go, but they were still recovering from the hurricanes that they had previously. So I said all that to say, when one of us is impacted, all of us are impacted. We're sitting here from different countries, different states, different parts of the world, but you can see the line. You can also see the communities that are most impacted. We look alike no matter where we are in the world. And so until we can all get together and work together and say that this is enough, no, you cannot build these extractive industries in my country. You cannot build them in my community because it will impact my brothers and sisters in Africa. No, we will not accept extractive products or these exports from Southwest Louisiana and Southeast Texas because it's hurting my brothers and sisters in Southwest Louisiana and Southeast Texas. Until we can stop it on both ends, then we're going to continuously be pushing and pulling. We have to be stopping it on both ends. Like he said, if there's no buyer, there's no seller. We have to start with the banks, start with the communities, educate the people in the communities. John just educated us on methane and hydrogen. The folks in the communities don't understand how impactful those things are to them because it's greenwashed. When you hear terms like LNG, liquefied natural gas, you're thinking, oh, it's natural, it's gonna be okay, it's better. They don't understand the methane that's put into the air from those industries. They don't understand how when those industries are being built, they're being built on our wetlands. They don't understand that if they want your home, eminent domain will take your home. They don't understand that if they offer you $50,000 for that house, it's not enough for you to move over to the next community. So it's up to us to educate. It's up to us to push back. It's up to us to say enough is enough. And it's up to us to say that we will no longer allow our communities or our brothers and sisters' communities to be sacrifice zones.
Well, when I hear colleagues, it's okay. When I hear colleagues speaking, I'm tempted to conclude that or go together with a say that a man is a worst enemy of himself. You know, it makes me wonder if climate disaster and associated impacts are real. Of course they are real. If they are real, who must be responsible? You see, does climate impacts affect the poor, the community, the indigenous people, and people who are sitting there? You see, year in, year out, we come at the COP and remind ourselves of the disasters associated with climate change. We go back, and like now from here, some member states will be sitting, signing up agreements to exploit fossil reserves. What are we saying? You see, in Africa, they are saying, the Western world, you have polluted, we have not polluted, and we are going to pollute while you stop polluting. Africa is saying, do we have the dirty energy? Not to start talking about the clean energy. So, this is the tug of war between the developed and the developing countries, especially where there is no alternative means. The COP is not coming up with a solution that from here on, African governments would bring food on the table to their communities, to their citizens. So what do? Without that alternative, explicitly explained with resources. This is the dynamics that we are facing. And often this makes me think the COP is sort of a brood of imperialist narrative that speaks green while the truth lies elsewhere. And lastly, we are having the indigenous communities who are sitting between the two worlds. These are defenseless communities who have to protect their land. And they are getting this against people or humans who have removed themselves from an ecosystem thinking. And indigenous people who have value systems that have placed them within the ecosystem. And they know that humans symbiotically relate with the environment. And the like you better say it, the petrochem industries have excluded human occupation in the ecosystem. hence the pollution. So indigenous communities relate well when we say, let's not pollute, because that is part of their value. They are part of the ecosystem. They are looking at the ecosystem's health and sustenance beyond their generation to the future generation, so that the similar benefit they enjoy today should be enjoyed by the tens and hundreds of generations to come. This is the dilemma we are sitting in. Thank you.
Yep, thank you to everyone. I think what's really troubling is how people are affected as a result of the fossil fuel industry and how they're ignored. In South Africa, in indigenous community that is under a lot of water stress. And before they got into that state, we informed the government and the municipalities that it takes so much water to create 1 megawatt power of electricity using coal in comparison to wind energy. A few years down the line, COVID-19 hit that community. We had over 20 people sharing 1 bathroom facility because it was water stress. They didn't have access to water. Gender-based violence was on the rise because, sadly, men did not understand why food wasn't being made in the food gardens, and they alluded that to the females not being able to work very nicely, but actually it was because there was a drought, there was a water stress. A lot of girls could not go to school because they didn't have sanitary facilities for them to attend school. It was such a huge, terrible impact. And you know what they did in that community? They commodified water. And in the spirit of them saying, drill, baby, drill, we need to start saying, shut up, baby, shut up.
Maybe let me add another aspect. When you talked about kind of renewables as a solution, I think we probably really need to look into, again, from my perspective, from the German perspective and the global north, into the energy demand perspective. Because as long as we, waste energy, as long as our energy demand is so high, in the first place, we will never solve the energy crisis, and we will never have less impacts that you described. If we don't decrease our energy demand, like if I look into Germany, it's a bit of a joke, sorry. If I look into, I see the first time now kind of in the media, in public in Germany, that people are kind of demanded to save their energy, kind of to reduce their energy, but on an individual level. I think that's fine and that's important, but the point in terms of attacking the polluting and heavy energy industry, that's not coming, right? And so exactly there we have to tap in and not just telling the person X and Y who is already maybe living an energy poor life to tell you can't only turn on your light to a specific moment or something. So I think we have to, that's the global north debate again, so we really have to look into our energy demand as well. But then also in terms of renewables, we will have the same, and we see it already, we will have the same stories. Where are the materials coming for renewables? It's coming from the global south again. So similar impacts, similar developments and situations are coming there again. So just replacing fossil fuels by renewables won't work either. And again, we have to, specifically from my perspective, we have to dig into that much more as well. And I wanted to respond to one of you, but I forgot. It will come back. I want to respond. I'll do it later.
So I think one other theme running through this is, I think everybody here is involved in individual fights where you are. The power of our foe is that they are coordinated on a global level. They see all of these fights, but we don't see each other necessarily. They blame energy demand issues on consumers, that consumers have to take care of it. But really, it's government systems funding heavy industry, funding defense. So they're sitting up here, we're down here. we're starting to make these connections about Germany and the US stopping on both sides. We're seeing what's happening in Africa. What are ways that you see right now and you can envision of us, I know building power from the bottom up, but genuinely, how? How can we do that? And what are you see are ways that can work if we interconnect globally, not just domestically?
I think, first of all, we have to all collectively hold industry accountable. If I was to murder someone, I would be in jail in the United States, probably for years, life, the death penalty, probably because I'm a black woman, right? But industry continues to kill people daily, and they don't have to pay a price for it. And so I think we need to work together to hold them accountable first. And then we push back against industry on both sides. We stop the build out. I like to use the analogy of an ant farm. When you think about an ant farm, it's all these ants in the farm, and they're doing their own thing, and they're kind of living, and they're stacking the sand, and they're building their colony. But when you tip it over, they all run out. So do you first catch the ones who ran out, or do you turn it back up so no more can get out? We have to catch the ones first or turn it up. Which one? It's a question. Y'all think catch the ants or turn the ant farm up? Who all say catch the ants? Who all say turn the ant farm up? We have to turn the ant farm up so no more get out. We have to stop more industry from coming. We cannot sit back and allow it to keep coming, because the more that comes, the harder it's gonna be for us to catch it. The more ants that get out, the harder it's gonna be for us to put them back in. We need to hold the ones accountable that are already here, Sasol, Venture Global, PPG, but we can't, while we're fighting them, allow Driftwood LNG and Commonwealth and all these other ones to be coming, because as soon as you finish fighting it, then you're fighting another one. So we have to make sure that our focus is on what's proposed, making sure that no more is coming, making sure we're not signing any more deals, because every time we sign a deal, we're signing a 30-year death certificate on communities. These facilities don't come online overnight. It takes about 8 years for them to get the funding, come online, be built, and then start extracting. While we're doing that, other countries are becoming, they're no longer using these same things that we're saying we're sending to them. They're becoming less energy dependent. So we need to be focused on what's coming and have that collaboration across the board, to where we're saying from every angle, no, we don't want it here. That's not for us. What they're doing in Southwest Louisiana, we don't want it over here in Africa. No, we're not gonna take the money over here. And I think that's how we started. We look at the proposed projects, we work together on those projects to stop them from coming, and then we hold the ones that are already here accountable and make them pay for all the murders of our women, children, and families.
Going back to what Jean said, brought one thing to my mind, and she mentioned it, that we're dealing with multi-billion-dollar multinational corporations that operate globally. But we, as organizers in our individual countries, and in our local communities, have to work locally. So there's a synthesis there, that we have to act locally, but think globally. We have to think on a global scale as to how we approach and attack and address this beast that is virtually enslaving and destroying the entire world and civilization as we know it. One of the ways we do that is we have to elevate our voices and our arguments, or the narrative, on a scale that is equal to, if not exceeding, theirs. In other words, if you're in a fight with someone, you don't wait until they throw the first punch. You start punching from the get-go, especially if you know there's no way out of the fight but to fight. And that's what we have to do. We have to fight back and push back against the narrative We have to have opposition locally all the way up to the global level. How many of you notice the advertisements that all of these companies do touting the good things that they bring and all of what they're doing? Now, how many of you have seen what we're doing in our various organizations globally on that same level? You don't see it. Where there's no presence, there's no voice. Where there's no voice, there can be no effectiveness in terms of addressing that problem. So we have to elevate those voices where they are on the same global level as they are. They talk about the good, we show you the bad. They talk about the greatness and wonder, we show you the evil and the deprivation. We have to contrast that in order to garner and gather the human momentum and potential that says this is wrong and that exploitation of those cultures and peoples globally cannot continue. And if we do that, then we have a way to push back against that. And at the same time, what we also have to do, we have to join hands across this table with each other and all of you out there. Because if we don't do this and work together and be coordinated, they're going to pick us apart one by one at a time. They're going to go and get you, and then when they got the last one, there's nobody left but you. Who are you going to have to help you? So we got to stick together, and we got to fight together. We got to cry together. We got to work together. But this, and I'm going to be through. I believe firmly, I know firmly, we've already won this fight, y'all. Do you know that? We've already won this fight. And the reason I know that is because of something, a guy that I met years ago by the name of Tony Brown. He's a journalist, has had a TV show, been running in New York for 40 years. And Tony speaks to the fact of what we go through in this life, in this movement, is like watching a movie that you've already seen before, which means you know the beginning, the middle of the end, and the end. And we know this story too, the same way in this movement. The beginning, what was the beginning? In the beginning, God created what? The heavens and the earth. Well, what happened in the middle, John? In the middle, he gave his only begotten son. He made a sacrifice because he loved the world. And then what's the end of the story? Behold, I make all things new again, a new heaven and a new earth. Well, how's that new earth going to come into pass and into being if we don't do our part? We have to stand up, and no matter what we contribute and put in, we got to put our hand on the wheel. We've got to put our 2 cents in, and we've got to do what we can, where we can, while we can, to make this world and bring it into being. If we don't do it, it ain't going to get done. So we have to think locally or work locally, but act on a global scale, because we're trying to save a planet, and we're trying to save all of us from people who really don't care. Only way we do that is we got to care enough about each other to pull together and make it happen. We done won this fight, y'all, so let's clap for victory. We done won this. We won it. Come on. Let's hear it. Let me hear it. We won this fight already. Let's go to work. Let's do it. We can make this happen. It will come to pass. It may not be while I'm still here, or some of us, but it will happen and come to pass. And what do you want people that know you, or your children, or your grandchildren to say about you? That you were part of that fight, that you made a difference, that you sacrificed to make their future possible, or that you were somewhere in the back minding your own business and detached from the reality of the moment of what's going on here. Get in the fight, y'all. You can't win the fight unless you get in it. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that observation. And from African perspective and indigenous local communities, I think we should keep the fire burning to fight the fight. Declare climate emergency. And we can substantiate this, our fight, with informed knowledge. As indigenous communities and local communities back in Africa, we need to do some independent researches, because our governments currently are trying to play it around. They look at the technical framework that exists, and they maneuver and justify the course their cause. So without informed decision making in our struggle, whatever we say become trash. And with the hungry community in our backs, and the petrol companies are bringing food on the table, and me, indigenous person with a placard, just saying yay, yay. You see, hunger knows no rule. So this is the position we find ourselves in. And this research shouldn't be just for advocacy. It should go to an extent of even litigating our governments. Have them accountable. They make commitments here. They made commitments, lot of commitments that are to down to leave fossil energy below the ground. And these commitments that they are making, and this could be one of the avenues we could use to help them accountable. That should be the approach. You see, this debate is coming at a time when the world has, when the world has looked at fossil energy as something that they need. In fact, the need of fossil energy has come so much. Hence, the up in the price of the fossil fuel. I mean, petrol price went up. And recently, the world has shown how disparate are we, and we need fossil industries. So, and the narratives under the climate change framework, we are proponents of this and this side, and the world needs petrol. The world needs petrol products. And yet our state parties are making some commitments, and these commitments, for us to confront them, we need to substantiate ourselves with relevant information, credible information. Otherwise, our rhetoric, our narratives lose credibility and legitimacy at some point, case by case. This is the situation. Thank you.
I think for me, on my end, there's a wonderful initiative that's grounded on international cooperation, which is the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty, and I really appreciate what it stands for fundamentally. And I think it's up to us, and each and everyone in this room, to push our governments, to actually endorse that type of initiative, and also to connect with our various indigenous communities to actually suggest and teach them on the existing solutions that are currently in the pipeline, but there's such a significant pushback that we need genuine voices that are grounded on lived experiences to push such an initiative such as the treaty work. In Africa as well, sad my colleague Lorraine has left the room, but we just launched the African Climate Movement Space, which has over 250 CSOs across Africa. And what we did because of that was we were trying to stop working in silos. We're trying to say that the climate crisis is an issue across all boards. If we talk about gender, we can talk about how females are not represented in the energy sector. We can talk about how it's a biodiversity issue because fossil fuel production is the main driver to biodiversity loss. So we realized that we need to stop working in silos and create this space where we can all work together, which is where actually the Don't Gas Africa campaign was birthed. And one of the small wins, which actually triggered the war that we're in now, was when Team Energy Africa was formed 2 months ago. We managed through Climate Home News to stand in solidarity along with our international partners and expose that they are in bed with the fraudster, which then led to SE4All, UNECA themselves drawing themselves out of Team Energy Africa, who were fundamentally pushing fossil gas production here at COP. And that is definitely a battle won, but the war has only just begun. And we need to start utilizing these spaces. When the Africa sign-on letter came out earlier out this year, when CSOs were saying no in Africa, our partners in Europe through All Change International, through Global Gas and Oil Network, also then coordinated a European letter. But the significance around that letter, and something that I've very much appreciated, was Africa said no to Africa. And what our international partners said was, we are going to say no to our European partners in polluting countries. And we created a space where Africans were defining their own future, and the rest of the world was standing in solidarity, not to tell Africa what to do, but to say, we see you. And because of that, we are going to offer the support on the ground. And that has fundamentally created this huge ripple effect that I would even like to even stretch further, to the United States of America, so we can create a movement. Because as people say, alone we smile, but together we laugh. And the African climate movement space seeks to tackle that and bring up together an opportunity where we control the narrative and our own energy future.
Probably most of the people here in the room know the slogan, "United we will never be defeated." United we will never be defeated. Somehow, I want to bring that in here again. What I hear from you, I think somehow it sums up. I think that slogan has so much in it in terms of we need to listen to each other. I think we built up already some really crucial networks, but also need to deepen that much more and bring what I said in the beginning, not only your stories to the global north, but also your narrative, and educate people in my own country, in my own region. But then also I think we probably need to go a step further, not only networking and tell those stories, but organize. I think there are some beautiful moments in history, without probably not going into history now, because there's no time, but in history where we see when people organize, they win. When people be together and have the same kind of purpose and have the same motivation, we will win. And I do see it here as well. I mean, you said already we won already. I think we won already a lot, and we have to believe in that, and we have to believe already what we did. So I think if we continue organize each other and taking really I repeat myself, sorry, but taking the narrative from our brothers and sisters into all parts of the world, then I feel we can have actually a much bigger impact than we have now, and we will win.
Awesome. So I think we have 20 minutes for Q&A if folks would like to speak. But I would like to wonder if Mother Casey would like to say any words in particular with your wisdom on anything or everything that you've heard. Do we have a microphone in the audience? Or Mother Casey, would you like to come up on stage?
Stand if it's okay.
Working? Is it working?
Latia, thank you for inviting me. Thank you for allowing me to be here among you. Your wisdom has informed a great deal to me, and I appreciate being in your country and learning a bit from the earth herself here, from the sun, from the moon, from the mother ocean, from the winds. The spirits have come in my dreams and made me feel welcome. And I thank you. And I thank you, each and every one of you, for what you're doing. I'm listening to everyone here, and it means a great deal to me, because each and every person here is being informed by their portion of Mother Earth, the one true mother that we all share. Each one of us, if we're blessed, has a mother that teaches us, that shows us what's needed. At this particular time, the mother, the Father Sky, the Father Sun, the Moon Mother, is speaking through us, because we have to always remember that We talk about being water protectors, land defenders, but in truth, we at this moment must recognize that we ourselves are nature protecting itself. We're not separate from those green things that grow with their roots in the ground and we ingest. We're not separate from those wajinga, those birds that they call chicken sandwiches that we ingest, and the grains that form that bread. We're not separate from the sacred water that has come within us, that each and every one of us right at this moment, that water has been everywhere. You know, from the red quadrant of Mother Earth where our people are, from I'm Ponca from Oklahoma. Judy, Ponca Abadi. Judy is my true name, my Ponca name. And in the way that we've been taught in this time of prophecy, for us from the Arctic Circle down to the Antarctic and that red quadrant that runs through those territories they now call Alaska, Canada, United States, Central America, South America, and down into that way. They told us that there would be a time, and this is when I was young and learning, that there would be a time that the Red Nations people had to stand up and teach the ways that were indigenous teachings. And I hear all of those coming from you all because each and every one of us is being informed by the Mother Earth. She will endure, by the way. Whether our species decides to pay attention and come back into the natural laws that are always going to be in place is the choice, the critical place that we are right now. We're talking about renewable energies when in fact those could cause another land grab, another killing, another way that the doctrine of discovery, which is still in play, can come and claim more indigenous lands, more territories under the name of God. Well, Wakanda, the Great Spirit in the ways of the Ponca. By the way, that's a good movie because they're recognizing, I figure the Great Spirit speaking right through somebody writing that because Wakanda is a Ponca word, meaning the Great Spirit. And the Great Spirit means the essence of all things. And that's something else. What are we considering right this moment about those that don't have the same voice as we do, that don't speak the same language? Are we hearing the message of the forelegs as their extinction increases? Are we hearing the message of the water herself as she tells us, I'm going to flood that area because we have to purify. I have to create drought over here, Mother Earth says, because things are out of balance. I've got to catch their attention and tell them it's critical right now to align human law with natural law. To understand that the indigenous voices, although we are a small percentage of what's left of the human population, that within the biodiversity of Earth that is still healthy, 80% of it is within indigenous territories. That's no accident. The people of Houma Nation down in Louisiana knew and talked about the destruction of those wetlands you're talking about and said that's a protection. And yet the hurricanes are getting larger because these fools, these mass murderers that are the extractive industry, that are the fossil fuel fools, are creating a situation where the earth has to purify through these larger fires, through these ways of the waters changing. All of those things are also part of you. The warmth of your body, the water that lives within you, the cells that make up this robe that we wear over our spirits that are called bodies, are no different than the bodies, are actually part of all of the body of the Mother Earth and the Father Sky. So for us, part of this is that massive organization because we are one organism. Those guys, I had a dream last night about those ones in the suits and that called themselves leaders. And I saw them, the wind was moving them, and it was moving them north. I have no idea what that meant. They were fleeing in fear. Those of us, we were being redirected into another way, and we were happy, and we were strong, and we were together. I know that what you're saying is true. We have won. That's because we are aligning ourselves with the natural law. That's because we're listening to the messages of the Mother Earth. And some of us kind of think it's us. No, it is the water within us. It is the cellular makeup that is made up of all living things. It is the stone people that is the ancient wisdom of all things that ever lived before that is beneath our feet here in this sacred place called Africa, called Egypt. It is the breath that we share. And so when I come here, I'm with you. I can say these words clearly, declare a climate emergency. That's necessary. I would also say to recognize that your indigenous brothers and sisters, we do things within our sovereign territory, like with the Ponca Nation. We have written a statute that is called the Rights of Nature, which is the largest growing movement there is around the world right now. Rights of Nature is simply recognizing what always exists and the fact that we are nature ourselves as a species. But it also protects us within our legal structure. We have our own courts against the petroleum industries continuing to pollute. We've also done a statute on July 6th of this year that recognizes the rights of the two sacred rivers there, because she has a right in her own way to protect the fins, to protect those reptiles and those amphibians and the mosses and all of those things that live within her. We can utilize those within our territory, and in doing so, we protect our neighbors. So I also say that we should demand that the United Nations make the implementation of the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People a reality globally. And you can do that, yeah. I'll try to stop here for a while, but thank you for your time and thank you for what you do. I'm with you. Yeah.
Okay. Amazing. We have room for one question from the audience. Do we have any questions? I see one hand. Okay.
Hi, my name is Orla. I'm from a Dutch newspaper. I would like to write down this story because I think it's very interesting, but what I'm missing is some hard facts on which EU companies actually did invest in Africa since the energy crisis. I found a report from investments until 2021. And you named some examples, but I'm just wondering, do you have some concrete hard facts that I can use for my article?
Yeah, sure. I think I can share with you the recent policy briefing from the Don't Gas Africa. It really contextualizes that argument in that report with some evidence base. So I'm happy to share it with you just after this. Yep.
Do we have any other questions from the audience? Okay. Okay, I think we'll have some closing statements then. Roshetta? Do you want to use your microphone?
I just want to end with this poem that I wrote. I would like to ask everyone to close your eyes for a moment and be in the moment and feel, listen to, and hear the words of the poem, please. Breathe. Take a deep breath. In, out, slowly. Breathe. Sounds so easy, doesn't it? Well, it's easier said than done. When the air you breathe in your very lungs is the same air that will have you on the run to the ER with no insurance, waiting for hours with no assurance, gasping for air, needing water, but not from the faucet. No, that's not in order. Water to live, water to drink, but not from your own kitchen sink. The kitchen sink in your house, in your own little corner of the South, where you can't afford to pay the rent because on the lights your money was spent. And now you're sitting here in a waiting room thinking you'll be dying soon, all because you decided to breathe. Breathe. Sounds easy, don't it? It used to be, not long ago, when you could walk out your back door. Yes, door, not door, I'm from the South. You could climb the trees, feel the leaves, sit on their limbs, and feel the breeze. That's before your neighborhood was taken over and all the trees were cut down because LNG, oil and gas, were the new mayors in town. They came to town with broken truths, promising to better you, to make your life worth living, but it seems like they're doing nothing but killing. Seems like they promised you good jobs, but you're still the cleaning lady. Seems like they promised you wealth, but you're still robbing Peter to pay Paul. Promise to uplift you, but yet you still fall. Fall short of welfare, Section 8, food stamps, and all other government assistance. And now here you are in the ER, all because you decided to breathe. Breathe. Sounds easy, don't it? Well, not for us in frontline communities. Thank you.
Well, I want to take a moment to thank every single one of our incredible panelists for your words and wisdom today, and also the relentless and incredible fight that you have put your entire lives in. And I know so many people around this room are doing the exact same. So we shall not be defeated. We are not yet defeated. And together we will win, we have, and will continue. Thank you for everyone coming.
I think he dropped it. I think this is Ben.